No, let me tangent real quick. That kid, the fucking Dizzy kid or Nizzy kid or Mizzy kid from Great Britain, the person who was like videotaping themselves walking into people's houses, if he got fucking throat checked by
Nobody
an
knows what you're
adult.
talking about.
Well, I mean, I can link to you.
I
real
know
quick.
about it. It's
There's a
to be
young
fair,
man.
it's kind of funny. He's
There's
these things kind of funny.
there's a young man who is burglarizing people's houses and videotape himself doing it because he's doing it as an online prank, and because the United Kingdom is filled with fucking cucks, nobody's punching him in the fucking throat. If that guy got punched in the fucking throat, he would learn a lesson really quick about not going
Wouldn't
into
it make
other
more
people's
sense
houses.
that you should rob his house?
I mean,
He's not even robbing. He's just walking inside and then walking back
Oh,
out.
so somebody should walk inside of his house because it doesn't really teach him to not do that.
You're right. I would go to the Libertarian Council. I would find out what the just punishment is, and then if they came down that I was not allowed to throat check him, I had to walk into his house while videotaping myself. I would walk into his house while videotaping myself. But if they permitted the throat check, I would go with a throat check just because it would be easier and like more time efficient.
The Libertarian Council as a representative here on this panel, and throat chopping someone walking into your fucking house is indeed allowed.
They would, their mom's murderer. And then what would happen is, on some cases, they would find out that, oops, wrong person. And the whole reason why we have a fucking state and a court system and a fucking judiciary and law enforcement is exactly for the externalities that we're fucking talking about. Not everything is a goddamn market. Not everything is like.
Can I? I'm sorry. I'm not gonna be a part of the struggle session.
I can react to it. People fucking come after me.
I know. Okay, so topic 2. A new report estimates that 6% of the incarcerated U.S. population is in solitary confinement. That's 122,840 individuals. The report, though, acknowledges that this is almost certainly a wild undercount. Democratic Representative Cori Bush calls this a disaster and tragedy. But is that the case? Should solitary be completely banned? Does it have no legitimate uses? Delaware reports currently having 0 inmates in solitary and credits this to a specialized unit dealing with the mentally ill patients. Is that the way to go? So yeah, I saw this article talking about the massive number of people in solitary confinement. I think we all have some sort of criticisms of that. I'd be shocked that no one here would. That there would be someone here who has 0 criticisms of the practice. But my question is whether it has legitimate uses, right? And that like, especially with running a prison with like a complex filled with a bunch of very uncooperative people, and who can use violence at any point in time, right? Against his individual. I have a cousin actually who's the prison guard, and it's scary, because anything can happen in those environments. So again, like, should we get rid of this tool, even if the tool is flawed? And we'll go from there. But I want to state something beforehand, right? And there's no reason for me to state this. So we all know that the U.S. government is a criminal actor, right? We know.
Don't you
that
fucking dare.
It shouldn't use that any of its power used as a state is illegitimate on its face. In fact, the only people that I invite to these panels, they all agree to that, right? Which is why we don't bother talking about it, like the sun being yellow, right? We don't even discuss it because it's just the air that we breathe. So
I'll take that dub.
So instead, let's focus on the rest of it, right? While in our hearts grumbling about like how the U.S. Should be dissolved. Okay, all right, let's go to our latest.
So a couple like prefaces here. I don't have a lot of sympathy for violent criminals, and I think people give way too much sympathy for violent criminals. Just generally speaking, we see people commit absolutely atrocious acts, and then after the fact, when they're crying and they're sad about the whole series of events, we all, wow, that's just a little bit too harsh. Well, no, like they're generally people commit violent crimes, or not the best people, and especially repeat offenders. I would go so far as to say they are bad people. They're not people that we want around. They're not good. So this does not come from a place of sympathy for bad people. It entirely is based off the data, and the data does not seem to indicate that solitary confinement is really all that good, at least for the inmate themselves. Now, I can see legitimate uses. If you have somebody who is a threat to other people, right? You need to put them somewhere because they are violent and they're attacking inmates, they're attacking guards, they're throwing. There's plenty of events I can think of case files that I've looked at, right, where you have inmates that have grabbed entire big pots of soup, scalding hot soup, and thrown it on prison guards. Second, third degree burns on their body. They're just trying to do their job, and here they are being assaulted and abused, and it's absolutely disgusting. I can see when those risks occur to not be like, well, we got to bring them back. No, like if they are a danger, yes, we have to keep them separate away from other people because we just can't trust them not to hurt people. I could see it in cases where an inmate is like they themselves are in tremendous danger, right? Where let's say there's a couple other inmates that are planning to kill them, or they've whatever indication, or they've requested it, right? There's all sorts of reasons why you might want to pull somebody out and isolate them for their own safety as well. I can see those reasons. Just as a punishment for, shit that, is not a direct harm, maybe they aren't following the rules, it doesn't seem to actually cause any long-term benefits. It actually seems to cause a lot of detraction. So I would be opposed to it, generally speaking, with exceptions to personal safety of other inmates and guard staff. Instead, I would also go with the other data point that indicates what is good for recidivism, which is prisoners working. I think it's incredibly important to mandate that work. People, if you go to prison, you don't just sit there and rot. You work day after day after day, because the data shows that's good for you. So more working, less solitary.
Thank you so much. Scott, please.
So working off of the assumption that Prime Kai is late for it, right? Since we're all assuming that, we can set that to the side, right? So what is the problem with prisons? I think this is really, you have to figure out what the problem is before you can just start spouting off solutions, right? And the main problem, yes, obviously, is that it's a monopsony. And so because it's a monopsony, there is no one else that is purchasing the services of the private prison industry or the state-run facilities as a means of housing prisoners, right? The state is simply contracting corporations at a bid, and then the lowest bidder basically puts forward whatever it wants, and most of these government officials don't really give a fuck about recidivism because they're removed enough from it to where it doesn't affect them in their elections, or they're fucking middle management, bureaucrats that aren't going to get fired. And so, like, how do we want to solve this problem? Like, what is the best way to solve this problem? And so I would present something very similar to what Lactoid put forward. Assuming that we have state control over the prisons and that there's no bill put forward to, absolve that. What I would say is that we should get rid of every form of regulation that stops prisoners from working via the usage of telephones and via the usage of the internet. If you commit a white collar crime, but you know how to code, then you should be able to work for companies coding, so long as you're under supervision and you're not allowed to use the internet to do other things. And when you make money with whatever your marketable skill is, maybe it's a fucking call center and we can stop shipping them to fucking India, but we can have prisoners do them. Whatever it is, you should have a reduction in your time as you pay off your debts, literally, to the families and to the services that were utilized in your capture and for the crime that you committed. The thing about solitary confinement as this solution is that it's basically just torture. Is torture an appropriate punishment? Well, for a rapist, they can't really argue that they ought not be tortured, right? Like, they don't have fucking rights. You're a goddamn rapist. I don't give a fuck what happens to you. You're a rapist. But for people that commit nonviolent drug offenses, for example, which is a minority of drug charges, by the way, people like to say it's 47%, but they compile people that got arrested for a bunch of violent shit and also got drug arrests. But for that minority of people, any bill that stops in any way, shape, or form, be it a blanket bill for everyone or a bill for those specific individuals, that stops the state from compounding the damages it does to people that never should have been put in prison, is a bill that like you must support. You ought support. And so if there is going to be a blanket ban on torture of prisoners because of the fact that there are prisoners that should never be in prison, then we have to support them.
So I just want to say, Scott's like, he always has the best solutions. Like it's just without a doubt. Like, I'm prisoner 3917, right? I hear you want to upgrade your Comcast package. Can I get your credit card number? I think that's a fantastic future. Bold statement, and I love it. All right, let's go to our friend Corey.
Yeah, we'll send an inmate tech to you right away as soon as possible. Well, so I do echo. There are some points of agreement that I have with, let's say, Scott and Lactoid. That I guess we'll probably get into later. I'll keep it brief. Where it's like, so to answer the specific prompts of like, should solitary be completely banned? I would say, I'm very much against it. And just as Lactoid pointed out, as far as I can tell from the data, doesn't appear to be all that effective in terms of, achieving the end. As in, I have a hard time reconciling that if one of the goals of prison is in fact rehabilitation, amongst other goals, maybe retribution. I'm not saying I agree with these goals, but in fact, rehabilitation is one of them. I don't think solitary confinement has any place towards that end, at least based off the data that I've seen. So pretty much, I wouldn't universally ban it. I'm sure there's very exceptional niche uses for it, but there should be strict rules on how it can be implemented, or rather how long it can be implemented, and under what specific circumstances. As in pretty much like, as far as I can tell, 99.99% of the cases that it's used for, I would say it should not be used for. And I'll leave it there for now.
Okay. And just in case we do have a lot of agreement on this, I do have a plan to expand this question in case we need to. But all right, let's go to our friend counterpoints.
I think it's a tool in the tool belt. I think it should be used kind of like spanking for kids as an absolute last resort, excuse me. But it's still a tool in the tool belt. Man, y'all are really into spanking. That's weird as fuck. Nina and Corey were like, let's talk about
We're
that.
gonna get it. We're gonna fight about that. When you said that.
All right. I know how to get your guys' attention. Understood. So anyways, the point being that it should be used as an absolute last resort. The reason why I don't want to take it off the table is because I do think that there's violent people who absolutely need to have punishments put upon them so they can attempt to learn consequences. However, I do have a friend who was punitively put in solitary confinement for 4 days, and as a result, that dude, lost his shit, legit has like a form of like anxiety and PTSD from the incident, and actually has claustrophobia. Like, cannot be in a motor vehicle without a window cracked, because even just like the silence of being in a motor vehicle is terrifying to him, because it physically, like, you can carry stress in your body. It physically reminds him of being in a locked room for 4 days straight without anything to interact with for that period of time. So I'm sure it's overly punitive. I'm sure it's fucked up. I'm sure we're using it way too much right now. Just don't want to take the tool off the tool belt. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. And that brings up an interesting question that I want to ask later on. Thank you for that counterpoint. Let's go to Nina.
I think it might be muted, I think.
I am. Oh my gosh. My bad. So I want to address the spanking thing, because of course we always want to, right? So just like the use of corporal punishment is literally known to actually increase bad behavior in children, and giving them mental health and overall well-being detriment. So it's just really odd that you would say that you don't want to take it off the table, because it seems it's pretty obvious that it's bad. And using that example was just odd to us, which is, I assume, why Corey and I both had the same reaction there. Or we're just like,
we already had this.
No, I'm adamantly against it, because it causes negative mental health things in kids, and it actually leads to an increased aggression, antisocial behavior, and low self-esteem. So I'm not for that. What?
We're not debating yet.
I got a car horn.
Sorry. All right. yeah. Sorry.
I got a car horn going off behind me. Synth, go ahead. I gotta take care of this.
Sure.
I
So,
wasn't
Nina,
done,
you're not
but
done.
okay.
Go ahead, Nina.
Oh, well, you're not done. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, anyways, so I think that like a lot of the callousness when it comes to solitary confinement, I understand the relation of being separated, right? Like maybe you having to be in your own cell. That's fair, but I think the problem with that is that solitary confinement is very much limited to like 22 hours a day in your cell. So that is like a punishment in itself, and you also lose your privileges to having like communications to your family. You lose the privileges of being able to, do commissary or whatever, and that's not. I don't think that is, for one, helpful, and number two, if we're just talking about separating, I understand like the need to separate an individual, right? And I think that's fine to separate an individual, but I don't think it necessarily should go along with the insane punishments that come along with it. Like I don't think you should lose all of those. Like if somebody is violent and can't be around other people, I think that's fine to keep them
Oh
away
my
from other
God.
people, but I don't understand why we need to add the punishment aspect to it on top of that.
Synth, please.
Sure. So, solitary confinement, sometimes called like administrative segregation by the prison system, is it's by definition a form of punishment. It's generally used as a form of torture. The idea being that you give someone their just desserts, but just desserts by locking them in a room and not letting them have any human contact for very long periods of time, with the goal of inflicting enough distress to satisfy whoever is inflicting it. Solitary confinement is not just like when you're by yourself. It's far more severe and significant, and like I was saying, punitive by definition. I think that violent offenders do have human rights, so I don't think it's justified to torture people for fun, regardless of if they did bad things to other people. There are some common arguments you get from people who are like more reasonable on this issue. There'll be things like for example, I'll start with the first one. Is it the kind of thing that like maybe works as a punishment that deters people from doing bad things? It turns out it doesn't on data. It seems like we all agree on that. But there are some other ones that I think reasonable people also give out that some of you guys did. One of them is like, what if they're a threat to others? Something Lactoid said. Well, solitary confinement isn't even necessary as a means of preventing violent inmates from hurting others. So that means that it doesn't really make much sense to say that we should lock them in an isolated room. It's not the case that you have to lock them by themselves, no human contact, to prevent them from being able to harm others. It's not the case that like just purely social interactions going to cause that much harm to begin with. The other one is like, what if they're in danger is another one, right? It could be the case that they're in danger, but the way to prevent somebody from being in danger of other inmates hurting them is not to lock them away from any social contact whatsoever. That's not an approach that works for that. It's also wouldn't really be solitary confinement. It's just maybe you're just using the same cells or something along those lines. But I think the third one is counterpoints. Another reasonable person also said, I don't want to take the tool off the tool belt, which I understand that, right? Because there are easy hypotheticals we can think of where it is justified. But these are so rare that the risk of misuse is more likely than these hypothetical cases, as we see in the real world. And because of that, it's justified to get rid of it entirely. A total blanket ban on it is more likely to have good outcomes than saying, maybe we'll just be more stringent with it and we'll give them the opportunity to pick when to use it. Maybe we'll like reduce that. Turns out the risk of misuse is a lot higher than the potential to use it in justified cases. But this is all just it's like symptomatic of a larger issue, which is the prison system itself. The existence of it is founded on like the assumption that we have to have some kind of like punitive system with like retribution as opposed to a rehabilitative one. Turns out that doesn't actually work. Consequentially, it turns out that the goal of punishing somebody is already like a malformed goal to begin with, and instead of causing somebody harm when they cause harm because like it's maybe we think it's good for people to suffer if they cause somebody else suffering. Instead, the goal should be how do we minimize the amount of suffering and maximize the amount of happiness we're giving people throughout their lives. The way we do that isn't through having a system in which we punish people. It's by having a system in which we reform people for the kind of mistakes that led them to committing the crimes in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Aiko.
Okay, I'm glad Synth sort of came close to what I was about to talk about when it comes to this issue, especially in California. So they've passed a law banning this in California. Newsom vetoed it, and the reason why was because he wanted to do exactly what Synth was just talking about, which was keep the tool in the tool belt, but also like he gave an executive order to the prison system to try to reform its use so that it isn't as bad as it was before, or to basically take care of it in-house, sort of like, telling the police department that they can investigate themselves. I'm not sure that it's going to get the best of outcomes, but that's kind of the debate in California right now, is whether or not it should be reformed or gotten rid of entirely. Also, I've noticed 3 different standards that were given here, and I can think of one more, so I'm just going to kind of list them out. What Scott talked about sounds like restorative justice to me. What Corey talked about, whether or not something like this can be used for retribution or for rehabilitation, as well as the prison system more broadly. And the 4th standard that I can think of is deterrence, that you're doing it to stop them from behaving in a particular way, like you sort of again. So when I hear Synth say something like you're getting your just desserts, or that it's punitive by definition, it might be punitive in effect, whether or not you intend it to be that way. But it seems as if that there are multiple standards by which to judge whether something like this is justified. And I think maybe going forward we talk about which one it's going to be. Like, if we're going to justify it or not justify it, is it based just strictly on retribution or rehabilitation or deterrence? Because if we're talking about rehabilitation, which is perhaps the most noble goal of the justice system, and it doesn't meet this goal at all on any metric. But if it were to, we would have to say, okay, this experience is going to help somebody get better. I think whatever you think about the other standards, I think it absolutely will never, ever meet the rehabilitation standards.
Okay, open to the...
Okay, so I'm going to categorically reject the example that Counterpoints brought up in terms of spanking corporal punishment of children, unless he wants to admit that his children are criminals or on the pathway to criminality.
Did you not hear what happened earlier tonight? Sorry, I'll let you finish.
That's okay.
Lock him up.
That's all part of the fun of being a parent, I'm sure.
Lock him up.
He's in solitary right now.
I would make the case that even though I understand the point you're trying to make of it's a tool in the tool belt and it should be reserved in whatever, some sort of niche use, I would argue you're promoting criminality and solitary confinement as an end goal if you want to advocate for corporal punishment or any sort of hitting of children, where it's and also take into account.
Didn't we have this debate already?
I was about to say, this is going to get into corporal punishment and the methodology of these studies real quick.
Sure. Well, we can go down that path. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Everyone should go to Prime Kai's channel and look at the last debate that all of the players here already had on that. And it's great content. You should get Prime Kai's view on.
I wish I was there for that debate. Unfortunately not. I was there in spirit, sort of, as someone can attest to. And also children, they're developing brains and they're developing working models of how to navigate the world. If you want to introduce violence from a parental figure, you're setting this child up for failure and to be on the pathway to criminal.
Corey, I love you and I respect your intellect, but we gotta be really specific with our fucking language, okay? There's obviously a huge difference between your kid fucking pops some other kid in the fucking mouth, so you yank him back and then you smack his butt, versus you just come out and you whip the belt off of your fucking trousers every time you get home from work and you're like, come on, son, it's fucking 20 minutes of beating before I have my fucking vodka. The term violence very clearly has a pretty wide fucking definition.
Sure, okay. I'm wondering if you want to tease out that.
Come on, let's not go too far down on this road, please.
Okay, fine. I'll make my final. Although, this is.
We'll talk about spanking adults. They're into that.
Well, yeah,
but I have a question as to solitary confinement afterwards.
My last point will be: if you want to look at a spectrum of corporal punishment and make that distinction, I wonder if you make the same distinction when it comes to child sexual abuse, and that there's a difference between groping and full-on sexual abuse. Would you make that position?
Hold up. So can I bite this bullet? Yeah, there's a huge difference between rape and grabbing somebody's boob.
So, and would you apply that same standard for children, as in would you make some sort of prescription of groping a child, much less detrimental, and maybe it's an open question of whether it's actually damaging to a child versus actual more extreme child sexual abuse.
So let's just be very specific, and I'm going to use an example for you, because violence, right? As a matter of fact, somebody look up the definition of violence and fucking read it to me real quick, but I'm pretty sure it's going to have something to do with physical contact or whatever the fuck. Okay, my son and I roughhoused all the fucking time. we wrestle, we fight. As a matter of fact, like 50% of the time that we literally like half the time what he wants to do is jump on a fucking trampoline, use a big like medicine ball that you jump up and down on, and throw it at each other as hard and as violently as we can and bounce it off of each other's skulls. And
do you actually want me to read you the definition?
please read me the definition of violence.
One of them is strength of emotion or an unpleasant or destructive natural force.
What's the other one? Because I don't think that's the one we're looking for.
The other one is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, kill, or damage or kill somebody or something.
I think the operative
really
term
can't
there is
pick-
going to be intent to hurt. I think that's going to be the
Okay,
the
but
crux.
so the one is violence is considered emotional as well.
Okay. So anyways, so the point being, my son thinks that it's fucking hilarious to basically like walk up and like sprint throughout the room and then punch me in the dick and then laugh and run away as fast as he can, okay? And I basically told him like, hey, if you do that like again, like I'm gonna pop you in the shoulder because you keep hurting me and I don't think that's really nice and I want you to stop. You haven't listened to me. I'll show you what that feels like. And he's like, ha 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 ha, runs up, does it again. So I pop him in the shoulder and he's like, ow, that hurt. And I was like, yes, that's what you were doing to me. Now do you understand why I was telling you not to do the thing anymore? And he was like, yeah, I get it. So like you can teach lessons about violence by having violence. I don't think that we should have like an entire society where there's no implementations of violence, even if it's instructive or even
You
if
think
it's
an
temporarily
adult is
painful.
gonna learn what violence is because they get beaten up? Like, you really think
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about?
I think lots of adults.
That's
as a matter of fact, no, let me tangent real quick. That kid, the fucking Dizzy kid or Nizzy kid or Mizzy kid from Great Britain, the person who was like videotaping themselves walking into people's houses, if he got fucking throat checked by
Nobody
an
knows what you're
adult,
talking about.
well, I mean, I
I
can
know
link to you real quick.
about it. It's
There's a
To
to be
young
fair, it's
man.
kind of funny.
There's
These things kind of funny.
there is a young man who is burglarizing people's houses and videotape himself doing it because he's doing it as an online prank, and because the United Kingdom is filled with fucking cucks, nobody's punching him in the fucking throat. If that guy got punched in the fucking throat, he would learn a lesson really quick about not
Wait,
going
wouldn't it
into
make
other
more
people's
sense
houses.
that you should rob his house?
I mean,
He's not even robbing. He's just walking inside and then
Yeah.
walking back
Oh,
out.
so
Yeah,
somebody should walk
I would-
inside of his house because it
yeah,
doesn't
I
really
would-
teach him to not
You're
do that.
right. I would go to the Libertarian Council. I would find out what the just punishment is,
Oh,
and then
God, don't you bring that up.
and then if they came down that I was not allowed to throat check him, I had to walk into his house while videotaping myself. I would walk into his house while videotaping myself. But if they permitted the throat check, I would go with a throat check just because it would be easier and like more time efficient.
The Libertarian
check would does
Council
feel
has a
good there.
representative here on this panel, and throat chopping
we're talking
someone
about
walking into your fucking house is indeed
prisons.
allowed.
We're talking
thank
about prisons.
you
A
so
lot
much.
of people in prisons are like just, they might be in for a drug offense, for example, and then they, violate some prison policy because maybe there's like Scott in their libertarian brain. They feel like they shouldn't have to follow the rules, and they get stuck in the hole. Do you think that's like gonna teach them to?
Well, it'll probably
Anything?
teach him not to do that shit again. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Negative reinforcement.
I don't
does
think.
in
I'm
fact
gonna be
help
honest.
things.
I don't think the whole
I'm
thing
the
fixed
most
Scott. I think he is
rule-following motherfucker
so
here.
broken
bro.
that he's never gonna be fixed. You
This-
could put him in a hole
Like,
for
I'll
19
be
fucking
following
years,
a
and this
lot
man
of
is gonna be
rules,
the same. Let's be real.
like this tracks, I think, completely. So I understand I understand the point that you're trying to make, Connor, in terms of like I would agree with you that with enough force and fear, like you can get someone to modify their behavior. As in prison, like yes, I will take your point that maybe solitary confinement can stop someone from doing something in prison, but in terms of like the long term of like when they get out and actually promoting delinquent behavior and deviant behavior and future criminal behavior, just as in corporal punishment, I know you can hit a child, you get them to immediately stop what they're doing, but in terms of long-term consequences, it doesn't seem to pan out, and the data is pretty robust on that.
Like, I'm literally Googling, like, negative reinforcement right now. And, like, by the way, this is what happens with, like, fucking lefty panels. They're like, oh, I got a fucking
is
study
a
that
lefty
says that
panel?
everything... It's Twitch politics. It's always a lefty panel.
Right? What are you talking about?
Oh.
I'm the only right winger here.
Right. So, basically, like, I Google negative reinforcement, what is it and how does it work? And, like, bam, 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 bam. I got, like, half a dozen to a dozen things saying that, like, it's effective, but you have to do it in this specific way. or whatever.
Counterpoint. So you're,
So if
those
I take-
studies do exist, but you're confused on what negative reinforcement is. Negative reinforcement is not positive punishment, right? Positive punishment is what you're thinking of, where you add damage to the situation. Negative reinforcement is where you
Positive-
take something
okay,
away. That's
so-
why it's called negative.
does positive punishment
Negative,
work?
yeah, negative reinforcement would be like taking their right, like taking away their video game and saying you can't play that.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's the same articles, and it says positive punishment can be effective when it immediately follows the unwanted behavior.
It can be, yeah, that's certainly true.
no.
So
Although I think that's
Okay.
for dogs.
Let's go.
So-
Let's
oh,
go.
is it for dogs?
If you
Can
permit-
I-
if you permit your children
First
to obtain
article was for dogs.
Humans.
I wanna-
Humans are not dogs.
I
So
wanna
no,
hear from
the
Sam.
issue is that we have data on this. Even with humans, positive punishment can be effective, like you said, even in the same way it does for dogs. If it immediately follows the, even if you want to find it for humans in particular, immediately following some kind of like bad behavior, positive punishment does disincentivize it because it creates a sort of psychological link. But the issue with solitary confinement, and the issue with the deserts ethics broadly, ends up being the fact that they're not effective because obviously it's not going to be effective to give somebody a mental illness. That's not going to make them less likely to commit crimes. It's going to make their life miserable. That's what it's going to do.
I mean,
It
if you actually want like to
Go ahead,
reduce
you go, Scott.
recidivism, then like you pair convicts up that are like really problematic with horses. Like equine therapy is a really good way to like solve these problems. Like the fact of the matter is like despite the fact that like from what is justified, right? That I state, and I know that people don't like this, is that like if you're a rapist or a murderer, I don't give a fuck what they do to you. It's not so much that I don't give a fuck per se what they do to you. It's that I don't have any right to argue that like violence or the police or anything be done to stop you from doing that. You're absolutely allowed to do that. But it's certainly not gonna like make the situation better. Like there's no data, there's no inkling that we have that like solitary confinement is going to solve any problems. The only problem it's going to solve is we feel better because we got to enact punishment on those people, and like that has a really limited use. Because it's mostly just going to make that happen to like people that are in the prison system, right? Like it's mostly just going to affect like the prison guards. It's like the greater society doesn't feel better because some dude somewhere that they don't even know about, as shown by this article. Most people are unaware of how much it occurs, right? Like they don't even know that someone's getting this punishment, so they don't even have an ability to feel better about it. Like it's just not very effective. It's kind of just stupid.
Right.
I'm imagining like a prisoner punching a horse. So like that is
No, yeah.
interesting.
I was
imagine-
gonna meme on
super
that
successful.
because if you punch a
I
fucking
feel
horse,
you.
he's gonna kick you in the goddamn face.
Yes,
You're gonna learn a
because
lesson real quick.
It forces you to develop a relationship that requires you to like gain skills of empathy, right? Like to understand like when the horse is
Yeah, like
stressed
dog
or like
training
when
is
you can
also really
touch
helpful
them.
too.
Yeah, the big difference though is that horses are more difficult and that horses will fuck you up if you're not careful. So it also like it really forces them to engage in that way.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, like I mean, I'm totally with you on like the animal therapy type thing. That's like I've seen lots on that, and it seems criminal that we're not actually doing this because it seems.
Well, it's
so effective.
expensive as fuck and it requires tax dollars, which are stolen money.
Which is stolen money. We all know that, and we all know that. But yeah, so
That's why I said this was a less controversial topic, because we would all agree that it's stolen money.
yeah,
Right. Right. We'll agree.
I mean, my job's done if you all agree. You know what I mean? Like,
but
fuck.
criminal. So solitary confinement. Like you guys, the way I put forth this topic, right? I talked about how like guards working in a highly oppositional environment might need this tool to help them get control of situations, right? And it seems like almost everyone here agreed on that it can be effective for doing that thing. You disagreed, saying that like long term, in terms of like the benefit for the prisoner, maybe the benefit long term for society outside once we release that prisoner, about those
No, I think I figured out the problem here. I think I figured out the problem is that we collectively as a society have been propagandized into believing that solitary confinement just means a person is separated from the other prisoners, when what solitary confinement really is intentional torture and isolation to make someone go fucking psycho.
Absolutely.
Sure. And so, what I was wondering, because like hearing counterpoints anecdote about his friend, and like what they went through, like the idea of like having nothing to interact with, I think is interesting and problematic. That like you're in the cell for a very long time.
That's
and
literally
it's just,
torture.
Like, I hear you. Yep. For a very long time. So and nothing to do, and like you're just with your thoughts, and however that kind of spirals. However, what if we reformed solitary, right? Like what if we had like a TV screen built to the wall, like a plexiglass like covering, right? And like they can interact with that. What if we're
Like
streaming
1984 style?
Nah.
Yes,
What
indeed.
if we? No.
Beautiful.
What if we? Sorry, I'll let
Just
you finish. 'Cause I wanna go
messages
in a
of
different
like
direction.
peace.
I have a totally different direction. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay, all right. Well,
Content brain. I can see
what
it
if
on
we're
his face.
streaming calming music into the cell,
Uh-huh.
right? What if we gave them like a book to read or something, right? Like what if
10 minutes of
we,
hate.
like we reformed? Oh my god! What if we reformed the process of solitary, right? Like you literally cannot do it the old way, right? Like that's highly illegal. You can't do that, but they have to have things to interact with. So the TV's got to be working. There's got to be music streamed to the cell. There's got to be things for them to interact with. They are separated, and maybe they need to be separated for a while because of their behavior. But they are not in there alone with their thoughts.
No. Okay. Opposite. So opposite. So mushrooms and sensory deprivation tank. So basically, where they can't even feel their own skin, they're in pitch black. They got salt water that's at the perfect temperature that touches their skin, so they're like their sense of touch is like off. And then like mushrooms, and then you're saying that you want to get them away from their thoughts. No, I want them to think about their crimes that they've committed, like while they're being like hyper empathetic to the hallucinations that they generate. So I would say like rather than solitary confinement for 96 hours, how about sensory deprivation tank plus psilocybin for like a solid 12 hours?
Oh my god.
Just
Okay,
want
Prime.
Minority Report, like where they just like are in
You're
like
gonna-
some weird
you're gonna-
tank.
Oh,
You're gonna
okay, Prime.
break
Hold on.
half
I
the
got.
people
I got
and
to just say,
heal half the people with that.
when in my misspent youth, I was in jail on 3 different occasions. And we can talk about this later at some point if you want. I'm an open book. But when I was in there, I was reading Lucretius, and I was also like studying like 3rd year Attic Greek. And so I had those textbooks brought allowed. Yeah. And so I just had those I even had like Greek
As
graffiti on the
prisoners
walls. Like,
do.
yeah. But here's the thing: like, we didn't even have
Fucking
things like
Count of Monte
solitary.
Cristo over here.
Yeah, but it was just a county jail. It wasn't like anything big. There was no, but boredom was still the number one like form of torture, even in the local pokey, right? Which is like you're not doing serious time. You're in there I was in there for 6 weeks one time, but it was boredom is the thing that gets you. And so anytime I left, one of the things that happened to me is people would approach me all the time and ask me if they could have my books. Didn't matter what I was reading. Like, again, I was reading Lucretius for crying out loud. Like, how much could that appeal to somebody necessarily who's in prison, or jail? But they wanted it. They desperately wanted something to engage with. They wanted content. They wanted content for their brain. And the only other thing they had was like a television that was shared by like maybe 40 or 50 inmates. And so they couldn't always watch the thing that they wanted to watch. So like printed words on paper was like incredibly valuable to them. And they weren't even in solitary confinement. Like they weren't dealing with the kind of, like they could talk to their neighbors. They could tell each other stories. They could play dominoes. They could watch the TV that was on in common or whatever. And even then, like it wasn't enough content. Like they were incredibly bored. And so you can just imagine what happens when you're in like Connor's like sensory deprivation chamber. Like it's gonna drive you just absolutely insane. And I don't even think we need the things that Connor talked about because that's what we already have, right?
Okay,
so Yeah.
We need
go
more
ahead.
D&D in prison.
Yes.
Yeah.
So meme territory. We need to put them on a sensory roller coaster. So first, like sensory deprivation tank plus mushrooms for the first 12 hours, and then have Twitch politics piped into their fucking solitary cell for like fucking 96 hours. Then sensory deprivation tank with mushrooms again, and then you just gotta go back and forth until they gradually like lose their shit and their brain is a fucking just a puddle
Yeah,
of
I'm
fucking
assuming we're trying to prevent crime. I'm
No,
assuming, but it
they,
doesn't
they
say.
will not- they won't be able to prevent crime because their brain will be a puddle by the time
Much
they fucking leave.
Hassan.
So so like you know, I live in a house, and I do rather than an apartment. I'm just saying, where I live in a house.
Oh.
So I got this whole house to interact with, to do stuff, but like I don't. Like I stay in my room for the majority of the day.
Do you live
right?
with other people?
Yeah, I live with other people. So I stay in my room for the majority of the day. And like I am fine with this, right? Like, because I'm like a shut-in, like no fucking around. Like I'm a shut-in. And a friend of mine had said to me that, like, you know, if you had ever gone to jail and they put you into a cell, like in solitary, you'd be okay, right? But they're wrong, because I've got like a lot of things to interact with here, you know. I got a lot of things to, like, you know, keep the demons away. So I deal with isolation fine, but like the thing that makes that a lot more manageable is just like all my different
But
distractions.
it's isolation. I mean, I don't know if it's really like isolation.
Well, okay, sure, fine, yeah, exactly, right? Full isolation, however you like to define that. So I'm saying that, like, if the thing that you guys are agreeing to, right, and I think you've all done it to some level, is that there are some times where we need to separate inmates from the rest of the population for safety reasons, right? To get them away because they're doing everything. Like a thing that they do in prison is called gassing, which is fucking disgusting. It's like mixing pee and shit and like bombing that at guards. That's vile. That's the thing they do, right? Because prisoners want to take control of their of their lives, and that's literally all the thing they can do. So they start throwing their feces and their urine at other people. So you need to separate that individual. Okay, so we can acknowledge that's the case. Then it seems like the easy fix, if it's not simply to punish, but the easy fix would be to give some things to interact with, right? Lock them in the rec room, but not the actual rec room, because that would be a bad idea. But you understand what I mean, right?
I have an idea. It's kind of me. It's maybe a little memey, but the more I think about it, the more it might actually work. You might have to like redesign some things for this, but the point is we want to keep them like away in terms of not being able to hurt somebody and not being able to be hurt, right?
Don't say Discord.
I'm not gonna say this. I'm not gonna... Now,
You can definitely hurt people on Discord.
I used to have we couldn't do this. I used to have guinea pigs, and guinea pigs, they have weak backs, so you can't put them in balls, but you can put hamsters in balls. And the point is to keep them safe and keep an eye on them to the point where they can't like get into other people's shit, but they're still like around and they're still like interacting with the environment. What if we had like plexiglass hamster balls?
The
ball
ball-based
boy.
solution.
The ball boy.
We had a ball boy solution for the inmates, so like they couldn't
There's that
like,
old TV show, The
sumo
Prisoner,
outfits, like the
where the
fake
big-
sumo outfits. Yeah.
Now I know it sounds memey, but like let's say we actually like had a pilot project to put like instead of solitary, the people who we otherwise put in solitary go into hamster balls, and like then they can't attack people and they can't be attacked because it's like hard plexiglass hamster balls. I mean, they're pretty much
Whoever
good, right?
does this,
What if you
whoever
speed
does-
up in one direction, then go back the other direction really quickly? They just start getting momentum in the
Ball, yeah,
prison.
because the ball would become the weapon then, right?
So it's like possible, but I don't think like the risk.
You're gonna be the one
It's one
harassed.
of those,
People
like,
are just gonna
padded-
keep
it's
fucking
like-
rolling you. Like, the
I'm
fuck?
telling you, we just need to invent force fields.
You can kill them. Okay, so like if they're
School
harassing,
shootings, all that.
no, if they're harassing the person by like rolling their hamster ball where they don't want to go, the guards can get involved, right? But like they're not gonna get shanked. They can't get shanked. They're in a plexiglass hamster ball. Does anybody actually have like a serious argument against this proposal?
I love Lactoid.
Well,
These
okay,
Filipinos love
How
little
would
mean,
they
guys.
get like? How
don't know
would that
that
work
would-
on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I don't have an argument per se, but in terms of like the logistics, like getting them
Yeah.
in, getting them out,
Yeah.
and like getting them, like how are they gonna eat? Go into the cafeteria? You're
And
gonna like
relieve
throw.
themselves.
Yeah, they go to the cafeteria and like the guard like has a key to like a little trap door on the hamster ball. Opens the hamster ball, puts in the tray of food, then closes and
So
locks
are they
the hamster
shitting
ball.
in the hamster ball?
No, they can
So,
go for bathroom
there-
breaks. Hey guard, I need to go for a bathroom break. Wheel the
And
hamster
They
ball.
didn't
They're
have
in a
like
rolling
a
ball
dock.
with food in
Wait,
their
wait,
hands for-
That's a lot more work
We
for
can't
the
even have
guards.
trains in the United States. We're not gonna be able to do that.
But the inmates are probably gonna like be cooperative in the sense of like I want to put the tray out of
Wait,
the hamster ball,
no, no,
otherwise I have
wait.
to deal with the hamster.
I think I have an
No,
argument.
no,
I
no, no.
think
You
I have an
cannot
argument.
assume that.
Well,
that
Well, okay,
inmates
then they're
will
gonna be
cooperate.
stuck in there with a tray, and that's not my problem.
Actually, so then why even
Well,
have
none
them
of
in
it's your
prison?
problem.
Why have them in prison to begin with? They could just like live their life, like
Just,
as in
have
like,
them out, yeah,
they're
and, like,
in, they're just
yeah.
living. Like, that's mobile prison. You
This
can
This
is
is just a more. This is just a more elaborate ankle monitor. Is what this is, right? It's a way of.
Basically.
No, because in prison the concern is like gassing, for example, right, or grabbing a pot of like burning.
No, but
soup
what
and
if
Oh,
their
stuff
I've
in
concern
it.
seen
is
those
that,
Or
like, they're
shanking
a-
somebody,
a
or
crime boss?
or shanking somebody, or raping something, like the shit that inmates do. Like that's
Yeah,
the
but
kind
what
of
if
shit
they're,
we're
like,
trying to
You
like.
can
crime
still
boss.
gas them. There's air holes in those balls. You just
Yeah, I
throw
would
the
assume there'd
thing
be
in
air
the
holes.
air
Well, we're
hole.
talking no with like little air holes. Like if they try to
Prisoners
like
are very creative.
gas themselves. If they
Tiny
try
little
that
gas
shit,
balls. Like
but they
you
can try, but most of that like maybe like a little bit would leak out, but like most of that's like staying in the ball. And
No,
then
I'm
they're
talking
gonna have
about
to deal
people
with it.
from the outside gassing him.
Like inmates like surrounding the hamster ball.
Yeah.
They
And,
look.
like,
you know,
They use
they're
the
all
air
a bunch of
holes.
Little turds
No,
with
like
air holes.
the pinholes are so small that like you're not like it's just gonna smear.
It's
You're
not
not
even
actually
air.
gonna be able
I
to.
don't think
It's
fluid
not.
dynamics works on it's on your side here. Like the amount of air that a human consumes, especially when they're rolling themselves in a ball, right? Like I think that like, the amount of carbon
seen
dioxide oxygen exchange
No,
is probably
no,
going to kill them.
Have you seen people like out in the water with like, or there's entire games in which people like are in these balls and they're running each other.
But they have the big
not supposed to
holes. You just
stay-
said you're going to shrink them to
No,
microscopic
so
size.
it's like a hard plastic sphere. And then
Oh,
you
hard
have, like-
plastic, so you can just
yeah.
roll them into a wall
Smush it.
really hard, so it
Yeah,
shatters.
you could like kill
No,
people.
wait, no, it's like bulletproof plexiglass. You're not smashing that, okay? And then you have like
Oh,
really,
oh,
really.
What if
so
they
now
take
it
the
hits his
poop and they
head.
smush it through
No,
the
no,
hole?
no,
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 hear me out. Hear me out.
Let him finish. Let him finish.
You give him a.
He's going to break his neck.
Let him cook.
You give him a padded helmet that you can.
Oh my god. This is
But you have little pinholes. You have little
This is
pinholes.
getting more and more elaborate
Well,
and expensive.
You have little pinholes like surrounding the plexiglass hamster ball. Because like I know it's not perfect, but in my mind,
Well,
like
that
if you
makes
have,
it weaker.
you have somebody who like, okay, we cannot have this person like physically interacting with the environment, but and we also we need to protect them, but we have to like let them be social. Like they're going to be sitting there in the hamster ball next to all of their inmates, like talking to them about whatever. Like even play chess. Like, hey, can you move king to to 4G, right?
A7 or whatever, yeah.
4G.
Yeah. So somebody in my chat pointed out at this point you don't even need them to be in the prison anymore.
That's
You
what I
can just
said.
let them-
somebody-
That's
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, that's what Nina said. Okay, so I want to
I
go
have
back
a friend.
to.
I have a friend. Who,
Let
well,
them
I have
out.
I have a friend who genuinely his idea of like prison abolition is like put like a body camera on every prisoner and an electroshock collar, and then just let them like live their life and like shock them if they do something wrong.
That seems even.
That sounds
That's
like that fitness
psychotic.
lack
That's
voice.
way
That
more
sounds like that fitness lack
psychotic.
voice.
They have that.
That's something-
They have that.
that's
They have that.
something
It's called
Scott
an
would
ankle
say.
monitor. They will shock you if you try to take them off.
Well,
But hold on, I know that's a little bit different than what you're talking
No,
about.
but
But I
how-
want to
I
go
was
back
just
to
speaking
Prime's
from
idea.
experience
imagine
from
being
his
the
jail
Yeah,
perv
days.
that's right. Yeah.
imagine
That's
being
what
the
they put
perv
on
who
me after I-
volunteers for the body camera duty, where you're just like watching people beat off all fucking day.
You
That's
need like a
cool.
1-to-1 like ratio of somebody watching, like that one person.
No,
that
but
seems like
like,
that'd be
no,
insane.
imagine
Yeah, but
if
then you
it's
can
not
shock
even
them,
1-to-1. Imagine if it's like 15-to-1 and your camera's just filled with dicks. This sounds worse for the person who's
They
employed.
would like tattooed onto
watching
their
the
body,
fucking
like.
prisoners.
I think AI will get sophisticated enough that it could probably be like outsourced to that.
Yeah.
You don't
Like,
think
it
that how
recognizes
the
a
robot
dick and just
revolution is
zaps
going to
them.
begin is
Oh,
by
yeah,
making
yeah.
robots watch dicks all day? That's exactly how the
Okay.
robot
Okay,
revolution
I'd like
is
to
gonna
go back to Prime's
Oh.
idea of an Orwellian telescreen that just
Uh-huh.
beams propaganda into your brain the whole time.
be.
So that like in
You will
like
not
in,
commit crime.
Is your friend.
Yeah.
The United States is the greatest republic ever formed by man.
Yeah,
that's where
taxes-
Scott's going.
Just
Feel your
taxes
eyes
are
open, you know,
voluntary.
and so you have to watch it. Like,
Clockwork Orange style, yeah.
But it is true that to some degree, you know, like we can do this. Like we do this in schools, right? Like there's certain materials that are available in the public library, and like we make decisions as to what you can read at different age levels or whatever. So can you give them humanitarian content, right? But limit like the kind of content they're consuming in the hopes that you can give some rehabilitative like function to this like location.
You're saying they would have like a computer in their room or whatever?
Yeah,
that they can
maybe,
interact
but
with
maybe it has
that,
like a limited
you have
Slack where everyone in
Right.
it is like someone you're authorized to have communication with, and it's monitored. And
right,
uh,
and
you know,
you can access content that's just like educational or something. I actually think I would be okay
Yeah.
with that.
or talk
I
to
don't think
people
that's
that
a
you're
bad point.
authorized to talk with, or talk to counselors,
Right.
or talk to
That would be
like
a
there
great
are.
idea. That
Yeah.
you just I hate to interrupt you
I
because you
actually
just
love
touched
that.
on you just touched on the thing that I think is the most important that we've kind of been like not focusing enough on, which is the issue is not just a matter of like not having entertainment, but the biggest issue psychologically is not having human interaction. Like you just said, Aiko, just
Right.
some kind of mechanism, not Discord, but some kind of mechanism to be able to talk to the people
ChatGPT.
electronically or something. Just
Yeah,
human
because
contact.
prisons have like
ChatGPT, yeah.
prison yeah prisons have like payphones, like incredibly expensive payphones that are very exploitative, but they allow some level of communication. So there's your precedent to say, okay, clearly prisoners can have communication, but it has to be monitored. And then but we expand that communication, so because that is the definition. The UN defines let's see, it's called the Mandela rules is what they consider solitary confinement, and it's 22 hours a week or more of confinement for 15 days consecutive, in which there is in which there is no meaningful human interaction.
Yep.
So if it's the no meaningful human interaction that makes it torturous, that's the part we should address more than the hours a day or the days of the week.
Well, hold
Yeah,
on.
but, like-
So
Go
Nina,
ahead.
sorry, Nina and Prime were, or Prime pointed his finger, so I'm assuming he agreed. Nina pointed out like ChatGPT, and I like that's actually really fucking interesting to me, because basically you could have like, obviously you should still have like human interactions between the guards and the prisoners so they actually know what a human being looks like and all that kind of stuff. But like ChatGPT, you can set parameters for like the way it behaves and what it's allowed to talk about and all that kind of stuff. So you could basically have it have sociable conversations, and then also it would be like kind of like an organic conversation where you're like, hey, I'm interested in this thing. Can you tell me about the Lord of the Rings broken down into a 2-paragraph whatever? Like you could basically allow the font of creativity of that person be where they're not interacting with somebody, so there's no risk of like damage or hurt or any of that kind of thing, but they also still have a way to play with their brain that isn't like we're just giving people in solitary confinement a fucking PS5 with like the newest game.
Like, you
And
can go
it
even
could
farther than that.
it could trick you into confessing to crimes.
Very good.
That's true, boy. Sure.
Great.
Maybe like like the fear of rats. I don't know. Maybe that might be helpful. But you could go farther than that, right? Like, what if you had
Julia.
like an AI generate like a virtual person on a screen, and either like because we don't have the technology for this right now, but maybe type in like what you want to talk to them about and they respond, or when we get there, the ability to just like talk, right, to have a conversation. If that was the case, right, would you guys be fine with solitary confinement? Right, this person has some interaction, and especially if it's to the point where most people accept it as like a genuine conversation, right? Even if that, like in the back of their brains, this is a robot, right? But they're having that interaction, and they have things to distract themselves. Like within solitary confinement, as defined by the UN, would that be okay with you?
No, I don't think that I think that the harms caused by not having that human and social interaction are gonna outweigh whatever the harms are of like somebody potentially saying something mean to you in your one social interaction per day. So I think it's just give them real human beings to interact with. It's fine.
I'm mostly memeing.
And if I'm not mistaken, Mandela rules says meaningful human contact. So until like somebody declares ChatGPT to be human,
Exactly. No, but that's what I'm saying. Like within the Mandela rules, or you don't have the human interaction, but you have this AI, right? This
That's
virtual.
prolonged contact. Yeah.
Yeah, like I think that might be.
It would be an
Okay.
improvement because it provides like some enrichment to your brain, but I still don't think it's enough. Like I still think human rights
So,
are being violated.
I think we, you know,
Totally
I
agree.
didn't want to be the guy that like be the killjoy while everybody was memeing, so I just sat back. But
Oh,
like,
really?
wanna
You
do
really
that.
do, huh?
so I mean, it's important to recognize again, I guess, to restate that solitary confinement is not designed to help anybody. It's not designed
Right.
to solve any problems, right? Like solitary confinement is designed to be a form of retribution to punish people so that the power dynamic between prisoner and prison guard can be reestablished to dehumanize and break prisoners so that they will respect the authority of the prison guards, so that presumably this broken individual will then submit to the authority and behave, when more often than not, it breaks them, it makes them worse, and it creates a worse dynamic between prison guards and prisoners, which makes these places hellholes that are basically in a constant state of war. So, like, we don't need to reform this system. We just need to do away
Get rid
with
of
this
it, yeah.
terrible system. Like, we don't need to, like, come up with a new AI thing. Like, it is incredibly rare that someone is such a fucking danger to other people that they have to be locked into a room for 22 hours. And if you're talking about someone at that level, then they need to be transported to a mental health facility until they can re-enter the prison population and they can be mentally healthy and sound enough to be around other people in a less controlled environment.
So I agree with you, Scott, and I'm
I don't
pretty
think
much
yeah.
on the like banning solitary. So I think the overall question is like, because like I'm against it for multiple reasons. One of them is that it's not compatible with rehabilitation. So I think the question becomes like, are we okay, or like, are we in favor of like turning solitary confinement into rehabilitation, as it's no longer punitive, and it's part of the rehabilitation process now, and it's not just, as you say, torture, which I agree with. It's torture. Where it's like
I mean, yeah,
towards
it's
that
fine,
end.
but it's like it's apples and oranges at that point. Like, just ban one and institute programs based off of research that are the cheapest available things that have the best results.
Yeah,
Until
fair enough.
I
such
agree
a
with
time that like we can fully privatize the system.
I agree with Scott, except this is all very expensive, right? And so from a lot of our paradigms, that's not a problem. But because we're spending like stolen tax money, then that's really not an option that's available if you don't like believe in like spending more tax money than we currently are. Like, this is going to be a very expensive solution. One of the reasons why this happens is because it's cheaper for them. Like you said, it isn't designed to solve problems. Well, it's
Yeah, but it
designed to
doesn't do
solve
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's designed to solve problems that the guards have, right? It's designed to solve problems for them, not for the prisoner. But it's a cheap and in the short term easy way to like deal with like perceived problems. And if we're gonna do something better, which everything that you just outlined is absolutely what we should be doing, but that's more expensive. We need like more tax dollars to fund that.
So I think, you know,
Yeah.
Thomas Sowell has a quote that, you know, I think a lot of people here will agree with, even if they don't like libertarians, which is there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs, right? And so
Right.
the trade-off with solitary confinement is this idea that it's cheaper, but it doesn't actually get rid of any problems. It introduces new problems.
Yeah,
right. So
I agree.
you
In the
have
long
you
run,
have
it's more expensive, right? Yeah.
even in the short term, like in the short term, you could just put someone in a cell. Like you could just put them in a different area. You don't need to get rid of their commissary privileges. Like you can cycle them out for longer distances on the yard, and you can put people that are problematic, you know, in the yard at a different time under heavier guard, which is kind of what they're already fucking doing. Like you could just do away with the thing and it wouldn't cost you any additional funds, or minimally at best.
Yeah. Or you could put them in a hamster ball, as like.
So I can tell you why
Well,
why
that causes new problems, right? Like the hamster ball thing I know is funny and we were memeing about it, but like the biggest issue with that is the very issue that I talk about with solitary confinement, which is that it's designed to dehumanize the prisoner. And the more you dehumanize the prisoner, the worse it is. Like one of the cheapest fucking solutions that we could possibly do right now is just allow prisoners to wear fucking clothing that has been sanctioned. that doesn't have problems on it. Prisoners currently are given fucking numbers and they're given fucking outfits that are all exactly the same so that they can be created into a collectivized unit of prisoners and creates an us versus them mentality. If you just allowed people to wear different colored shirts and different colored pants and different colored shoes and allow them to stylize their own choices, you psychologically change the environment that you're in, and it leads to better outcomes. This is what they do in the Nordic model.
Okay, so a lot of these solutions, like Nordic model is the best one I've seen, but in a lot of these solutions, though, they do end up costing money at least in the short term. Like if you give each prisoner a cell who otherwise would go to solitary confinement, more and more prisoners are going to be like, oh, I can have a cell to myself. Like there's perverse incentives there, and there's a shortage of space in prisons to begin with. So what they want is they want to utilize solitary confinement, but then they want to make it brutal so that nobody wants to go there, so that they're not actually like filling up solitary confinement either. They're just like cycling people through and then making it so unpleasant that they won't want to return. Like that's the incentive.
I could be convinced that is true, but I don't know that I necessarily buy that. I think a lot of us have a certain bias against prisoners because we know that they are criminals, that we have like an opinion. We have an opinion of them that they engage like criminals in all of their interactions, where I don't think criminals actually do that. Like, I don't think they actually, like, I don't think they're constantly.
Well, I'm not talking about criminals. I'm talking about prisoners, and prisoners are always looking
Much more
to
likely
get
to.
That's what
that
I mean.
one increase in what they perceive to be standard of living, like what that guy did in order to get my book on my way out. Every time that happened, someone was always looking to have a book, because if they have a book, that's one more creature comfort they have than all of the other prisoners. They absolutely would value like being in a cell by themselves.
Yeah, but there's a chicken and egg scenario here, though, right? Like there's a chicken and egg scenario here where we can look at other models where it's done differently, and prisoner behavior is different because of the way that they are treated, right? So it's like, is it that criminals are always looking to game the system, or a majority of the time they're looking to game the system in the smallest way? Or is it that they're treated so fucking shittily that they're put in a position where they feel like they always need to game the system to get something a little better?
I mean, I don't know.
I think we'd all agree with that, right?
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, I think that's true. But at the same time, like, because they're put in that position, that's where the perverse incentives happen. Like, if even people in the local county jail who've never been to jail before, who are just there for a couple of days, start to act that way after 2 or 3 days, you can imagine like how ubiquitous it would be for prisoners just about all over the place. Now, if they were in the Scandinavian model,
too,
yeah, if they're in the Scandinavian model where they're treated humanely and the recidivism goes down, so it actually gets less expensive instead of more expensive, and all of that kind of stuff, like that's the sort of like virtuous cycle that I think like would be very beneficial that we could get into. But also that requires paying prison guards a lot more than we do now, so that we don't have to get the dregs of society in those jobs, like people who can act more professionally and like
probably training them more, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay. This is something that I feel like I'm sympathetic to the treating people more humanely, because I think that like what we really should have is like a social ramp where people are preparing to re-enter society. So if they're, if they want to get an education, if they want to socialize better, if they want to, read philosophy books that they steal from iCowRich or some shit like that, they should have like the ability to do so. But I also think that there's something where like one size doesn't fit all. So for instance, like I was a pissed off 17-year-old. Nobody could tell me what to do. I smoked pot. I got into fistfights. I chased girls. I was 6'4", so almost nobody could tell me, what to do. And what it took in order for me to get my shit together was a 6'4", 250-pound fucking drill instructor screaming in my fucking face that if I didn't do exactly what he said, that he was gonna fuck me up. So I almost feel like there needs to be like a tier of like the happy-go-lucky, you can wear blue jeans without pockets, fucking read books and hang out with iCowRich and talk about philosophy jail. And then there needs to be like you're gonna fucking stand online and we're gonna go by the numbers and count everybody down military-style jail. And then I have a crying infant, so I'm not gonna go get a bottle.
Yeah, just real quick. Obviously, I agree with you in that regard because I'm for a market solution and not a one-size-fits-all solution controlled by the state.
Okay.
I'm such a weird. I'm like, it doesn't look like a real baby.
It's just light.
So it's like a doll.
I
Obviously,
mean,
it
I
is, I'm
think
just making a joke.
I think the reason I said this was going to be the least controversial topic of the two is because we all agree that like the current way of doing it is like terrible and should be gone. Like maybe
Right.
some of us think that it can be reformed or repurposed, and some of us think it should be abolished. Although I think that first group would agree, like would be fine with the second group. Like if they just abolished it, I think all of us would be fine with that solution. But I just think some of us are saying, barring that, like in California, the bill got vetoed, and they're going to have to try to reform it because the governor, actually, they just passed that law again this year, and I don't know if he'll veto it the second time. But if he does, I mean, they're going to have to figure out like ways to compromise because they may not be able to get the ideal solution, right? Which is to just not have solitary confinement.
I mean, it's a huge like these people. These people don't fucking change because it's one of the biggest cash crops in America, right? Like, there's a reason that like Eisenhower's farewell address, everyone talks about him saying the military-industrial complex when he also mentioned the prison military-industrial complex. There's a reason that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. It's
Well, I think we
because
all
it
agree
makes-
too about not getting rid of private prisons.
Well, I would privatize it fully, but the
Right,
problem
yeah,
there is
yeah,
that
but
how?
we all agree on that.
Hopefully they've done really
How's that
well,
possible?
Scott.
How do you?
Well,
but that's not possible,
because
right?
you have
Because
to
you
move-
need coercion.
yeah, it is. No.
How
you-
is it
you would-
not going to incentivize Scott?
Prison
how is
without
it going to
coercion?
incentivize people hiring like having like things that are going to send you to said prisons to be like more
I brought this up in
stringent
my
and,
opening
like,
statement.
crack
The
down?
problem is not the existence of privatization. The problem is that it's a monopsony, right? The problem is that there's only one buyer of prison services, and that is the
Who
United
was the
States
one that's
government.
buying it?
The United
Okay,
States
what if it
government.
wasn't the government? Okay, so if it wasn't the government buying it, you're in favor
Wait, that's
of
hold on.
private
That's not even
prisons.
true. Wait, that's also just not even true. Like Scott,
Yeah, that's
currently
also
there.
incredibly not true, obviously. Yes,
Yeah,
you're correct.
with their exactly like with current prison,
Okay,
with
Nina,
current
glad
prison,
you
with
got there
current
with sense
No,
out.
no Scott, with current
That's
prison
why it's a
labor.
private prison, my guy.
Yeah, with current prison labor, there's a lot of different buyers. It's not just the case there's one buyer. It's not just the case just the U.S. government. There's a lot of private companies will use these prisons as a source for labor. And we see those like
That's
made
not-
in the
yeah,
USA
that's
stickers
not-
and things. A lot of the time,
That
those
doesn't
things
make
being
it not
made
a
in the US
monopsony
prisons.
just because they also
What do
utilize
they
them
have a
for labor.
woodworking?
Sometimes you have
what do
multiple
they have a
buyers.
woodworking thing?
Okay, you have multiple buyers for the labor of the prisoners involved, but you only have one
Yeah.
buyer for the housing of criminals. That's
Why
the
don't they-
US government.
Why isn't it the case that we're seeing boycotts that bring
No.
better qualities of life from these buyers? Like there's a
Excuse
market
me?
here, right? There's a market here, right? Why aren't we seeing boycotts from these buyers so the prisoners have better qualities of life?
Because it doesn't benefit them? Because it's
Yeah,
a single
exactly.
buyer market.
Yeah, exactly. Holy shit, I completely agree. Under existing capitalist systems, under existing free market prison systems, what you're going to see
There's
is
no
these, like,
such thing as
these
free market
manufacturers.
prison systems
what
in
you're
the
gonna
US.
What you're
It's
going
not
to
a
see,
free
I know you have a different standard
I don't
of free
see how
markets,
there
different
can be.
definition, right?
How's it
It
a
was-
monopsony that's
It's just
controlled
a
by the
different
state in
definition.
a
Hold on,
free
Scott.
market?
Scott, listen, right? So if it's the case that there's a bunch of different people buying these services and they're still just choosing what makes them the most money, and it turns out that what makes them the most money is not the optical decision of making sure to boycott businesses or boycott prisons who have bad practices, then we're not going to see that under your ANCAP society either. We're going to see these businesses are going to run things in a way that benefits them the most, and that's going to be how do we outsource prison labor as effectively as possible? How do we outsource this slave labor for basically free?
What's going to exactly. So what you're gonna see is you're gonna see a prison system. The most effective, the most marketable, is going to be the one that gets their clients restitution as quickly as possible, which means the prison system that is able to utilize the labor to its highest capacity. And what does that mean? Well, cheap, unskilled labor is not going to be able to get high accounts of restitution quickly. So what that means is one of the most successful prison systems will be the prison system that figures out how to get all of their prisoners to behave and how to teach them highly marketable skills.
That would, if that was true, that would happen under the current prison system because obviously they have a vested interest in providing their the buyers of the labor as much with as cheap
Something
labor
like
as possible.
that is happening now in Scandinavia,
Dude,
right?
it's so involved with the state. That's silly.
I mean, you can just say it's involved
They're
with the state,
paid
right? But
to
in the real,
house the criminals.
the issue
It's
is in
different.
the real world, we only have examples of things that are interacting with the state. So if we want to make any kind of empirical argument whatsoever, you'll always be able to see the cope line of like, oh, but it's like that interacts with the state too much, right? But the principle that you're alluding to is one that applies to both. The reason why you're saying it would work in this institution would also work in the existing one that exists right now, but it doesn't. We see it doesn't work. There's got to be
We-
some flaw. And
We do have examples of criminal justice systems that don't exist with a state, right? Like Tehran, Mexico.
you think there's no state in Mexico?
What? No. of
Yeah.
course I
Okay.
don't.
So your argument doesn't work anymore, does it? So if it's the case, there's still an interaction with the state, Scott. Right? Then
In
there's
what
still
way-
an
in what
interaction
way
with the
is
state.
Tehran? In what way is Tehran interacting with the Mexican government? Are you aware?
Do you think that there's no way in which this location within Mexico is being protected and defended by the existence of a government in Mexico that stops invasions? You don't think that has any interaction?
Okay, so
They're like in a vacuum?
So what you're saying now, right? Now what you're saying as a means to invalidate my argument, because you love to do this, right? You don't actually love to actually discuss ideas. Instead, you're always
I
looking
do.
to subvert.
To invalidate
So-
arguments? That's
So
how debates work.
in order for this to say, well, they're based upon the protection of other systems. So we actually can't control. We can't talk about how the government works in any country in the world
No, Scott.
that is being protected in some capacity by the American
Scott,
empire.
no.
So now we
Scott,
actually
you're
can't
missing
talk
the
about,
argument.
let's say, any other country.
Oh
Because,
my God, you're
because
making my
the
point
other
for me. You don't
country's
even realize it.
protecting them in some capacity. I'm not making
Scott,
the argument for you.
You are. You just don't click. It's not clicking together for you. My entire point this entire time
It's
is we can
clicking,
still talk
trust
about.
me.
Listen, we can still talk about these examples, even if it's the case they interact with existing governments. Now you grasp that.
I'm following you along.
We're
the
making so much
entire way.
progress, Scott. You're
saying-
getting it. You're getting it. You're laughing all the
you're-
time, right? But like you
I know, I'm
gotta
laughing-
understand. You're like
I'm laughing because you refuse to debate
making-
ideas because you're a fucking snake. Like what
I'm
you're
refu-
doing
dude,
is you're saying
I'm
is that
refusing
it's
to debate your
impossible
ideas.
to
You're just
talk about.
insulting me.
You're saying it's yeah because you're easy to insult because you're just bullshitting.
You just
instead
don't
of
have
actually
arguments.
discussing the idea. No, I do have arguments.
You have. Well,
I-
you're
I-
a snake
They're
and you're
just
not engaging in my
bad, I
argument.
know.
Isn't it? That's not really a
No,
counter
I've
argument,
already.
Scott.
All right, so I'll go through and I'll defeat the argument again. Right? You're saying, right, is that
Let's see you struggle.
This is necessitated via a capitalist system is whoever's going to do it the cheapest and whoever's going to be able to house criminals in the cheapest way possible. I
You're
presented you with
rewinding,
an
Scott. You're not
alternative.
interacting with the argument. You're just rewinding back to an earlier point in the conversation. The argument that I just gave you is you made the claim that the reason we can't use this example, the reason we can't use our argument, or the one that I was using, right, is because of the fact that in the case of the private existing prisons that exist right now, they have an interaction with the state. I'm telling you that's not sufficient because everything got an interaction with the state. And you told me there was this example of Tehran, Mexico, and then
Right.
we talked about that for a bit, Scott. And what happened afterwards was you said we should be able to use this example. It doesn't matter that there's an interaction with the state. That was my entire point. You
It's a
conceded
controlled
to the fucking
variable.
premise.
Your entire point, right. So Tehran, Mexico has its own policing and its own prison system. And you're saying I can't use that as an example or that
No.
the example is invalidated because the Mexican government exists. Because
No.
the Mexican government affords
No,
some
Scott,
level
Scott,
of
stop.
protection.
You're just rambling.
No, no.
No,
I'm
you
not
are
just
mistaken. I'm
rambling.
not saying that. No, yeah, you are.
Okay, tell
This
me
is
why I'm
wrong. Look,
mistaken.
yeah, so you just said that I'm saying you can't use that example. I told you the exact opposite. You can use that example. That's my entire point.
So your entire
I've said
point
this
is that
several
I can't
times.
use the example, but
Yes.
it's wrong because Mexico exists.
Oh, Scott, I feel like you're like
So make a
operating.
po-
You're
make a
like
positive
it's
argument.
one-dimensional checkers you're playing right now, Scott. I'm telling you, you can use this example despite the fact that it interacts with the state. So it's not sufficient to say I can't use an example because it interacts with the state, because we can use examples that interact with the state.
Pause. When did I say that you can't use an example because it interacts with the state?
In regards to the private prison example, I said that the game theory works out such that it would be the case that if you were correct, it would also be correct in this domain. And you said we can't use that example because private prison systems as they exist now interact too much with the state.
That's not
That's
what I
when you
said.
talked about
I said
monopsony.
that there's a monopsony, right? And that it's not a free
You're
market
telling me
system.
you didn't say what I just said? It's
Yes, I'm
recorded. Why
telling
would you
you
lie
that-
about
yes.
that? There's no point.
I'm not lying, Sin.
Wait,
I'm saying a monopsony exists. It's not a free market system. You
Let
cannot use
counterpoint
that
go.
as an example of a free market
Counterpoint
system.
says Sim.
I
think
then
Sim.
laid out an example of what a free market system would
Poor cow.
potentially do,
Look.
and then you said, and then
Oh
you
my
were the
God.
one that jumped away.
Okay,
and wants
okay,
to-
okay.
and wants to
Yeah, I
talk
So
about
understand,
this.
yeah, we can
let's
talk
not
at
do
the
the
same-
let's not do the autopsy. Counterpoints. Go ahead.
Well, no. So what I was going to try to say is, typically I love fighting on Twitch and YouTube politics. I don't give a shit about rhetoric at all. It's very fun. I love like knife fights and shit. But typically, if I'm reviewing a debate, I view whenever somebody says the word "you said," like or "you," as kind of like a rhetorical failure, because typically instead of just engaging what they're, with what they're saying, you're basically reframing what they're saying. So, Synth, what I was curious about is that, like Scott is saying, that like he does not accept the for-profit examples of how there's perverse incentives within the American prison system, because basically the incentives are such that they interact with the state. And then we argued about what both of y'all were saying. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, no, I'm just tracking back the argument. I'm tracking back. So counterpoints. The reason why it's rhetorically important to do that is because other people aren't going to track the argument. Like, for example, you just didn't track the argument, right? So the whole point is to review the argument so other people know what's going on. I'm saying that listen, I'm telling you what I'm saying. I'm telling you what I'm saying, right?
Sure.
My argument is that in the case of the symmetry, there's not a symmetry breaker here between these two cases. We can use one example. We can also use the other example. That's the argument I'm making. If we can use this example despite the fact that it has this property, then this other example can also be used despite the fact that it has some property. So as long as it's the same property.
No, don't tell me. So I don't want to follow the rhetoric logic chain. What I want to follow instead is what is your positive argument about like jails or prisons?
No, I think he's just trying to ask you to move on a little bit. I
You want me
understand
to okay, counterpoints wants me to.
I think that's kind of where we're
He would be
going.
against
No,
private prisons because he thinks it leads to
I'm
perverse
asking
incentives.
what you think about the jails or prisons. What do you think about the current
I'm a
incentive
prison
structure?
abolitionist. I agree with Scott on that.
Well, fuck you both then.
The disagreement me and Scott were having is it the case what he's advocating for, which, I mean, it doesn't even sound like prison abolition to me. It's prison privatization. That seems to me like the kind of thing that still has all of the same issues.
It
Well,
could.
Don't agree with Scott. You know Scott's a fucking show
we
for
rarely.
corporations.
All right. Well, I'll let Lagford go, but I do want to get back to.
Can we point out the silliness for just a second? So
No,
you're in
I
favor of
don't
a
want to.
society that does not house criminals at all. What do you plan on
fine.
doing?
No, I don't. Well, what are you
Okay.
talking about?
Let's go
Like
to
that.
let's go Lagford.
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, briefly say a couple things.
Oh, I guess gulags aren't prisons. I guess. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Shut up,
So,
Scott.
Scott, I agree a lot with some of what you said. I don't think that there'd be as much of an incentive to train all the prisoners to have high income skills as much as I guess we would hope. Given first of all the cost of education and the cost of that training, and also you're controlling for a demographic that's probably going to be relatively resistant or incapable of engaging in high income skills to begin with. So I 100% agree, like they should be paying restitution. I just think we have to just accept that a lot of them are going to be doing menial labor, and that's fine, right? You should be working off your debt to your victims.
Yeah, of course.
Right. The
A lot of
only
people are gonna be
concern I
doing
have,
menial labor. Absolutely, yes.
yeah, 100%. The only concern
no
I
problem
and
with
this is
criminals working in coal mines.
Scott,
right, and this is maybe where I'm open to be convinced. Actually, I'm not super on board with the whole making this system private, just because I would want the prisoners would be paid the market rate for whatever task they're doing, and I would want that money to go as restitution to the victims, not to any portion of that to the prison. Does that make sense? And if you get a private prison, the only way it's making money is if it's skimming something off the top.
So, I mean, it would depend wholly upon this is the thing about like having to solve what the free market would do. If I could answer all of those questions perfectly, then the economic calculation problem wouldn't exist, right? Central planners, I'm not the genius central planner that can actually devise the perfect system. If I was, then central planning would work and communists wouldn't fucking starve, right? So what we have to do is we have to look at the incentives and be like, okay, well, what would the incentives like potentially lay out? And so if you're in a free market system of justice, and you're in a community, and that community is using rights enforcement agencies, for example, and insurance and things like that. So if you want to look at it from a pacifist perspective, like how people could voluntarily, is that you owe restitution for whatever crime you do. And while you are in the state of owing restitution for whatever crime it is that you do, you cannot argue that similar crimes not be done to you. Right, you don't own property. If you go out and you murder somebody, for example, right, you can't argue that the family not murder you. Except it's not murder; it's just a justified killing, right? And so what you do in that situation, I'm not off the rails. You just follow
Scott,
along.
can I
What
just
you
get
do
a
in that
consistency test really
situation?
quick? Just I want to test one piece of consistency. Do you think it's the case that if somebody murders your family member, you said they owe you their life earlier, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, if they murder my family member, sure.
Do you think that if a female murders your mom, do you think you can rape the female afterwards?
Well, I don't think rape and murder are the same thing.
Which do you
but
think
I
one's less than the other?
You
logically-
misspoke.
Okay,
Logically-
what if she raped?
Shh. I'll answer the question. I don't need further clarification from people that understand the question less than Seth. Like, so,
I'm
what I would say
asking
is that
a separate one.
the female cannot argue that anything be done to her. She has no rights until she pays restitution of her life.
So the answer to the question is yes, you can.
Yeah, you could rape her. You'd rape the murderer of your mother, yes. I wouldn't consider it
what if it
morally
wasn't-
good to do. I can't argue as an outsider that I use police to stop you from torturing or doing terrible things to the person who murdered your
With no
mother.
trial.
Okay,
Okay,
let's
wait a
go
minute,
back
wait
to
a
my
minute.
question. Look, because
I wanna-
With no trial?
I just
don't
want to
agree with
quickly
this.
run
This is-
one part of this down. Okay. Let's say you do. Okay. And then later on, it turns out to be a case of mistaken identity.
Whoops.
Then
Then
they
your
get to
life
rape
is
you back.
forfeit. Yeah,
Then
this
they
is
get
why-
to rape you
this
back.
is why-
Reverse Uno
this
card,
is why
bitch.
this is why it's not a reverse Uno card. It's actually a really good point, because this is why I said earlier that everything that you do comes with the potential risk of being an aggressor. That driving your vehicle from point A to point B, you understand that there is a certain risk that you might run someone over, that you might do something. The same is true when you are enacting vengeance upon those that you believe have wronged you, is that you're taking a gamble that you absolutely believe that that person is the individual that does it. And so the best way in order to not have a Hatfields and McCoy kind of situation is that you understand that you voluntarily cede authority in some regard to a created institution that can manage these things in a more stable format than what you would do in this kind of like lawlessness, kind of like we
Like
all
a
work
government?
without.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
not
a
against
government
government.
really
This is
seems like the-
voluntary.
Like a court system.
I want to ask
Every
one
single fucking
follow.
libertarian just turns out and describing a government.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
single
I want to
fucking
ask one follow up. I don't.
Libertarians
agree with
aren't
both.
against government.
I
sorry,
don't
Yeah,
agree-
let
I don't-
Covenant
I don't-
Covenant.
let
I don't-
Lactoid get it out, and
Thank
I
you.
had something I want to say. Go ahead.
I don't agree with the whole you can rape them part. But when it comes specifically to like the private prisons situation, because okay, so under my theory of what would be the ideal scenario, you have like a public institution that has the prisoners, and then like sends them out to go do work at the market rate, right? If you have a private prison in which now they get some portion of the profit that the prisoner makes, it all can't go to the victim now because the corporation that owns the prison has to make some kind of profit. Doesn't this corporation now have a direct incentive to try to influence arrest rates? So either whether it be working with the rights enforcement agencies to create more restrictive laws in an anarcho-capitalist society, or if we had a state, to lobby the government to have the police,
You can't
have more
you
power
can't
and arrest.
bounce
people.
you
That's
can't
the concern I
bounce
have.
You can't bounce in and out of the state thing, right? Like, I mean, like you live in a minarchist state that creates laws, but the criminal justice system is entirely privatized. Like that's a really weird amalgamation of like ANCAP libertarianism and statism. Like the two are contradictory.
Why don't you
Right, what I'm
create
saying is,
the,
regardless, that's why I brought up rights enforcement agency. So, like, regardless of the agency that's doing the enforcement, I see a perverse incentive there, and it seems like that perverse incentive would be alleviated by making sure that, like, the only person that gets the restitution is like the victim of the violent crime.
Well, I mean, the prisons are providing a service. Why would they not be? Why would they
Oh
be
man,
denied
it's
any
almost
profit?
like not everything should be run in a fucking market. Weird.
Your
fucking
inability to
weird.
understand
Hmm.
your inability to understand the dynamics of it is
Yeah,
not like a,
that
a fucking
argument
like
doesn't really
nuts.
work that much
It's
when
like,
you're just
it's
dumbass
so
and
much
you can't.
easier when I
Fine,
just trust the
fine. No,
politicians
we
that
talked
are
about
already
That's what-
fucking this up.
If you talk about for 5 minutes, I can talk for 5 minutes. So that's how we're gonna do this right now. No.
Oh
I
no.
understand just fucking fine. Okay? I understand just fucking fine. I just think that there's some things that don't respond to the market. And I would say that basically saying that it is morally permissible in order to rape your fucking your mother's murderer or some shit. While I understand that it makes sense that that person murdered this other person, and so they give up their rights as a human being until they fucking pay restitution or whatever, and everybody would be a sensible person, and they wouldn't exercise this right, because what if you're actually wrong, and therefore you have this 10D fucking galaxy brain calculation about whether or not to rape your mom's murderer. I think that what would actually happen in a fucking society is people are fucking retarded. They're stupid as shit. And so as a result, they would rape their mom's murderer. And then what would happen is, on some cases, they would find out that, oops, wrong person. And the whole reason why we have a fucking state and a court system and a fucking judiciary and law enforcement is exactly for the externalities that we're fucking talking about. Not everything is a goddamn market. Not everything is like.
Can I? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not gonna be a part of the fucking struggle session.
I can react to it.
7 people fucking come after me.
I know. You're always with attention. I get it. I
just wanted to clarify one aspect of that point.
Actually,
you let me clarify the one aspect, and then you can go. Okay?
Yeah, I just want to clarify one aspect of that point, because
we'll just do a round table of shitting on me, and I'll.
The
I'll
reason
have to
why I
shit on you
think
back in
I
return.
fucking love it. Go ahead, Aiko.
Well, Scott, I'm with you with the
making you
prison
the center
labor
of
thing.
attention, Scott. You should love it. Yeah. So, no, I think the reason why the state makes sense in that regard is specifically because it's a monopsony, right? Because if you have all these like sort of private justice systems that where you get to choose which one you become a member of, or however it works, then some of those justice systems might say that that person's innocent, and some others will say that that person's guilty. And so raping that person is like just in one system and not just in another system, and they're all overlapping. What you've described here specifically is Hatfield's and McCoy's situation, because these are the Hatfields had their own like way of like viewing justice, and so did the McCoys. And because there wasn't like in that situation, the government was very weak in those days and couldn't like crack down on what was happening.
You're based upon false premises, and now you're going like all the way down the line of the consequences of things that just aren't true, right? So like you're saying it makes sense that the state be the final arbiter. Except the problem is that even under a libertarian system, there is a final arbiter. It is not 7 different companies constantly trying to outdo one another to determine the. I mean, I can, sure, that's fine. If you give me just a second to go through it, but what you were talking about in the example of a rights enforcement agency, where you are existing in a society that accepts that, as opposed to a covenant community that might have a monopoly, but it is a voluntary one. So if you are in a situation where you have rights enforcement agencies and you have multiple ones in competition with each other, what occurs is when you move into a new area, they say, hey, if you buy property here or you visit here, you need to be represented by an REA, right? So you are represented by an REA. You have a Geico, you have some form of insurance. And what you do with that insurance is that you sign certain things voluntarily out of your control so that you can be protected and so that other people will do business with you. And so what that means is that in the event of one person accusing another person of a crime, the insurance companies figure out who is at fault, and then an arbitrator, if they can't figure out who's at fault, will preside over it. That will be the final say, because you've already voluntarily signed up for that to be your final say when you got that that representation for you. You chose ahead of time for that to occur. In the event of the prison, where it's determined that you're a danger, you're a threat in some way, and you need to do restitution, you and the other person that is also a victim of the crime have already voluntarily agreed to some form of prison system. And so instead of that person coming over and raping your mom, right, because Synth wants to bite the bullet in pure theory land instead of engaging in the real world, right, which libertarians actually do, is... No, let me get all the way through this.
You can talk to me a little bit. I want to.
He's got to be able to get through all that.
You want to subvert. Right. You want to subvert, and you want to get gotcha questions because you don't put forward positive positions. You just bullshit. Right?
I've made it pretty clear positive position.
What actually occurs in that situation is that there are different companies that go to these rights enforcement agencies and these arbitrating firms, and they sell their services to them. They say, hey, look, You want to put people in jail, and you want to do so they compete based off of how expensive it's going to be to the insurance company to house you, and that also means how much it's going to save them money in the future. So recidivism is also financially incentivized in the system. Sorry,
What if they
low
can't
recidivism
agree
rates.
to an arbitrator? What if those like different justice systems?
You
That's
know,
not- that's
fuck
not
the
how that works.
Libertarian theory
It's
hour.
literally not how
Fuck
that
this
works.
shit.
But it has to be
I have
voluntary,
one.
right?
Look, I don't even want to like dig too deep on it. I want to ask one really funny question.
Oh, just one question.
I'm
and
sorry.
we'll end it
I'll
all,
stop
of
talking.
course.
I'll stop talking right afterwards. It's a question for Scott. Right? It's kind of a funny one, right? Scott, earlier in the conversation, you said it was the case they also give up their right to life if they kill somebody unintentionally. So are you able to rate female manslaughterers?
Are you able to rape female manslaughters? I mean, like technically speaking, yeah.
Okay, there we go. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay, all right.
Right. It's
So,
like it's not an advantageous. It's
Can
not
I
an
ask
advantage.
Cynthia
It's
a
not.
Sure.
It's not a
Whatever you
moral.
want.
It is not. There's almost no moral system that you could look through that would say that that is a morally good thing. And on top of that, there's almost no society that would actually function in that way. Right. Like what you're doing is you're asking like a purely theory head question outside of any mechanisms of the real world existing.
No, there are parts of the
Stop.
world
You
where
don't know what you're
revenge
talking
rape
about. Stop.
is a thing.
Right. No, stop. Just stop being fucking
No, Scott,
silly
you
for
stop.
a moment. And
Stop.
no, I'm not gonna stop. Like
Okay, well, you're not-
if you're gonna do
I'm
the
not making
struggle
stop.
session
Okay,
where a bunch
hold
of
on,
people that don't
hold on.
understand
Okay.
libertarianism
Okay.
like come at me
Okay.
for it, like I'm gonna explain it.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's. Boy. So we're gonna end this because this will go on forever. I'm not sure how it happened, but you know, like everyone got seduced by the siren song of the ANCAP here. And I guess it's my fault.
Nobody got seduced.
I tried to resist.
I did.
It wasn't-
No,
it
you
wasn't-
fucking didn't. No one,
wasn't-
no, none of you fucking.
it
All
wasn't
of you bought into
contentions.
it. Every single
No,
one, all of you guilty. Even innocent, babyface Corey, bought into it.
No.
All of
Nobody
you are
got
fucking
seduced.
guilty.
Nobody
Every
got
single
seduced.
one.
We're all ANCAPs.
Everyone agreed.
Yeah, okay.
Everyone agreed on the topic that we should abolish this practice. So they were looking for something that they
yeah,
could collectively
I
remove
know
content
exactly.
out of.
And what I was going to say is that I deeply wish that our friend Synth had said that he was a prison abolitionist, because I would have really liked to interact with that topic.
Yeah, I had a few questions on that actually.
That
Yeah.
was so much
I
more
know.
interesting than anything else that we just experienced. So hopefully in the future,
We'll
I don't know.
dogpile him next.
Right?
Yeah, like it's very rare that I get to interact with prison abolitionists. So I really,
They don't
really wish you
exist.
had told us that.
There's no such thing as a prison abolitionist. They don't
Shut
actually
up.
exist.
Yeah.
There's also something a libertarian that can close
No,
it
they
something
don't.
else, apparently.
They'll just call it something else.
Exactly.
It's like they believe in it.
Okay. All right.
He believes
So-
in prisons.
And that's the kind of fun we could have had if you had said something about this. I don't know why you kept that a
I did.
secret.
I did, and then you told me to shut up, and then let like three
God.
other people talk about how
Yeah,
libertarianism
yeah.
is
Oh my
crazy.
God!
Scott,
Look, it's hard not to tell you to shut up.
let him finish.
So any which way, we're just gonna move past this and go on with our lives.